Hello, Varlets. Are you tired of your view looking like this? Or maybe like this? Do you want to play with something else but just can't let go of the awesome firepower that the Inferno Staff brings to the table? Well, perhaps this Blastmancer build might be just what you're looking for to mix it up a little bit. So let's get it on. Kicking things off with our melee weapon, you are free to use what you like as long as it allows you to bring down mutants as quickly as possible. I've got my trusty Deimos Forsword for this, and it's kitted with Maniac and Carapace as well as Uncanny Strike and Shred to give me some good dueling power against Crushers if they get a little too close for comfort. The star of the show is going to be the Trauma Staff that will be an alternative to the much beloved Inferno Staff. As such, we're going to spend some time talking about it here and explore some of the decisions I've made for it. Warp Resistance is going to be the dump stat of choice and will want everything as high as it will go. For perks, I've chosen Carapace damage and the 5% critical chance to be the most suitable choice for this build. Carapace damage will help bring our power up against Crushers. Since this is going to be a Blazing Spirit build, we'll also want to build up the Trauma Staff's crit chance as well, hence why the 5% crit chance perk is selected. As for blessings, Blazing Spirit is what allows us to kind of fulfill the Inferno Staff's role of powerful horde clear. With a fully charged Trauma Blast, the attack has a huge 8.4 meter blast radius, and every enemy within that radius will take a little bit of shockwave damage. Should your attack crit as well, all enemies will have 4 stacks of Soul Blaze applied to them thanks to Blazing Spirit. While Blazing Spirit only stacks up to 6 times, so within 2 critical attacks, the constant damage over time along with the shockwave damage from your attacks will wither them down. We'll circle back to Blazing Spirit in a bit, but for now let's move on to the next blessing, Warp Nexus. To be honest, I was really tossing and turning between Warp Nexus and Warp Flurry, even going so far as to run equations and math models to find out which would be better for the build, and of course, stress testing both of them to see which one was the better choice to bring in. In the end, if we focus on what this build is really supposed to do, which is to provide huge area damage and consistent horde clearance, then Warp Nexus is definitely the way to go. For Soul Blaze to be useful as a means of wiping out hordes, we need to stack it up as quickly as possible so that we can get the damage rolling. The faster the horde gets 6 stacks applied, the quicker they'll die. I even went ahead and made a table to convince myself that this was in fact the best choice to make. And true enough, the difference between 4 stacks and 6 stacks is just over double the damage. If you include the constant shockwave damage being applied at the same time, it really starts to add up. As for Curios, I have my usual 2 toughness, 1 health, along with the expected pairings of toughness, combat ability regeneration, as well as stamina regeneration. Moving on, let's take a look at our talent selection. No variations in builds today, but I was debating about certain nodes and whether it would be worth taking one over another. In the end, I chose what made the most sense for the purpose of this build. This build initially looked more or less exactly like the Cinder Mage, but after a lot of testing and number crunching, I implemented some tweaks that really makes the Blastmancer something of its own and not just a copy-paste of an existing build. The opening of this build takes Soul Stealer because you'll be dealing a lot of AoE burst damage, which will generate instant toughness for yourself. Better Meditation also benefits in the same manner, allowing you to essentially refund the majority of your casting costs if it activates at least once. This build will be taking Brain Rupture and Kinetic Flare too. As I mentioned in my Cinder Mage build, anything with Soul Blaze application, especially in an area, should have Kinetic Flare because it can proc on a single Soul Blaze tick. This is doubly so for the Trauma Staff because anything within its 8.4 meter blast radius can be hit by Kinetic Flare, and this massively increases your coverage against specials and elites, even behind cover and if they are out of sight. Now, you're probably curious about this cluster of nodes over here, and I can say after a lot of messing around, I've concluded that each of them has a role in keeping this build going. Since this is a Soul Blaze build with lots of AoE blasts, Soul Drinker will be easy to activate, giving us more crit and toughness regeneration, exactly what this build needs more of. Wildfire is chosen because it adds a base layer of consistency to this build. Unlike the Inferno Staff, there's always a chance we don't get lucky with our crits and fail to reach the 6 stacks we need to ramp our damage up. Wildfire does 2 things in this regard. First, it helps Soul Blaze keep going, priming fresh enemies so they potentially only need to be hit by 1 critical blast. Secondly, as long as something has Soul Blaze on it, it helps keep Soul Drinker rolling, giving us that vital extra 5% crit chance and additional toughness over time. Empiric Shock helps our Trauma Staff's DPS as well as the burst damage of our Kinetic Flare against chunky enemies. Because Empiric Shock is a debuff, it works as an additional multiplier to our damage, allowing us to actually deal significant damage to Crushers. Channel Force is taken for 2 reasons. Number 1, because we're using the charge attack the entire game, it means our primary attack practically has a permanent 20% damage buff. This helps with taking down range enemies, gunners, and specials from afar. Secondly, it pairs well with Empiric Resolve in that if you land just one single primary attack on an enemy, a sizable damage swing appears with the enemy taking at least 6% more damage and your Trauma Staff dealing 10% more damage with its charge attacks. You don't actually have to hit anything for Channel Force to give the extra damage too. Just fire a bolt every now and then at anything or nothing and boom, free 10% damage. This build is going to take Prescience instead of the usual cooldown aura. We need all the crit we can muster to get this build fit for its purpose. I'll be taking Bubble and Sanctuary for this build as well. Since we are stepping into the role of the infernal Bubble Psyker, we need to keep the Bubble aspect with us. The remainder of the nodes are pretty standard for my builds: Vulnerable Minds and Warp Rider for more damage, Empiric Resolve for peril resistance, and Warp Ghost to offset the negative toughness replenishment from Empiric Resolve. The keystone is going to be a single Warp Cipher node for some damage and cooldown. Now, the last node you see here is Penetration of the Soul, or POTS. I've read up and looked at other builds and did the math myself on whether this node will actually be useful or not, and my conclusion is that it provides a pretty sizable damage boost against the enemies that matter, all things considered. Before I get into my own numbers, let me show you the damage profile of the Trauma Blast first. As you can see here, the Trauma Staff does have some armor types where it's not dealing full damage against, namely Infested, Flak, and Carapace. Against Carapace and Flak, it has an ADM of 0.8, and against Infested, it has an ADM of 0.75, which is strange. In other words, increasing our rending will help us deal more damage against these enemies, which are mostly going to be elites and crushers. But how impactful is POTS actually going to be, you ask? What are the actual damage numbers that you're going to get from this additional rending? Well, I have just the table for you to look at. I did some baseline testing against POTS, and the net result is that at high peril, around 90% or so, which is where you're going to be playing quite a bit at, POTS adds around 23% damage with certain consistent buffs active against crushers. This is before you add other buffs like Warp Rider, Perfect Timing, and Channeled Force, and the debuff from Empiric Shock. So in my opinion, I think POTS adds a lot of value to the base damage of your build for a single point, allowing your Trauma Staff to get some extra damage in without having to do anything differently. If you play at high enough peril consistently, you'll be seeing damage numbers like this fairly often, which is pretty good all things considered. If there was one adjustment that you might want to make because you feel that giving up the cooldown aura is too much, then I would remove Channeled Force and stick it into Warp Battery. This gives you another 2 stacks of Warp Siphon, allowing for 15% more cooldown and 8% damage, which kind of makes up for the 10% loss in your Channeled Force. Now, let's see what your role is going to be in a team and how it's going to differ from playing the Inferno Staff. Your Emperor-given purpose with this build is to be the rock for your team. Between your bubble providing the anchor point and the overwhelming crowd control from your Trauma Staff, your job is to keep danger away from your team as best as possible, especially Drag Rages and Crushers. Use your Trauma Staff to knock enemies that are about to attack to the ground, disabling them momentarily and opening them up to being attacked. This is especially useful for dealing with groups of bulwarks or even lone bulwarks. Once the target has been knocked down, your priority is to look for other targets that also need to be knocked down. Keeping enemy after enemy sprawl on the floor, and ideally on top of each other, is going to make your team's life very easy since they don't have to fear or struggle trying to fight them. Now, that being said, make sure to clean up after yourself. Don't knock enemies down and then leave them there, only for them to get up and backstab your teammate in the kidney. That would be sloppy gameplay on your part. When it comes to hordes, if there is no one in front of you, and you are the front line, blasting the enemy front line as it comes is good for breaking up their advance. If you have an ally in front of you engaging and there are no elites to deal with at the time, blast the backline of the hordes to thin it out and scatter enemies towards your front line for them to kill. Blasting the front line while your Ogrin or Zealot is trying to fight is going to make their life a little harder since they won't have anything to smack and nothing to dodge, and their targets will be sent flying all over the place. So you might as well make use of your range to deal with damage to enemies they can't hit yet. The shockwave from your blast will also provide some stagger to help out a little. If a mixed horde appears, then focus on keeping your team safe. Crushers, Ragers, and Maulers always take top priority, so make sure to blast them down. Keep your peril up and let Blazing Spirit deal with the majority of the horde while you concentrate on the elites. Should a boss or monster appear, your job, like the Cinder Mage, is to keep everything else off your team while they take the boss down. Try your best to position yourself in a way where you have vision on your team and where the incoming enemies are approaching from. Help with boss damage if there's nothing left to protect your team from. Lastly, and very, very importantly, do not blast Pox Bursters if there's a teammate in front of you. The natural instinct against Bursters is to wait for them to come to you and then push them and dodge back. This is something you should be expecting your teammates to do, so take that into consideration. Don't be a liability and blow it up in your teammate's face. Better yet, make it a point to hold your blast if you are looking for the burster. If it's clear and there's space, then by all means blow it up. But if there's anyone near you, best to let them push it or you go into melee and push it away yourself. On that note, bursters will explode immediately from any charge level from your trauma blasts. No need to always go full charge when dealing with them. Lastly, let's take a look at some tips for this build. Tip number 1. Dodge sliding is your friend. When you're playing this build, or any weapon that requires a moment to channel, creating space is necessary if you want to pull off your attack. While dodging can sometimes be enough, nothing gives you as much space as you need than dodging into a slide either sideways or backwards. This will be one of your most powerful mobility tools in your kit, and it's your bread and butter, so use it plenty. Just make sure to watch your dodge count. Dodging like this consumes 2 dodge charges, and it's also why I value anticipation for that extra dodge count. Tip number 2. You can kind of dictate where enemies will fall depending on where you aim the center of your attack. If you want to knock enemies away from you, make sure you plant the epicenter in front of the target along with a little bit of leeway to account for reaction time and delay. I like to practice knocking enemies in the direction I want them to fall because it can help a lot with positioning and also prevents you from knocking enemies behind yourself, which can sometimes cause problems. Making it a conscious thing to do, however, is going to take effort, and it's also something I'm working on as well. Finally, tip 3, the center of the trauma blast will always knock enemies down regardless of charge level. Because we don't have the luxury of Warp Flurry in this build, sometimes you will have to use partial charges to prevent an enemy from attacking you or a teammate. If you ever find yourself getting closed in by the horde, a way to buy space is to trauma blast your feet and slide out of your compromised position. The area stagger is often enough to prevent poxwalkers and bruisers from attacking you, and it might just be what you need to get into safety. Well, there you have it. Ever since I put this build together, I've been really enjoying it, more so than the Inferno Staff. I like this build because it requires more thinking and strategy to do well, and that's much more engaging for my mind. At the same time, the unmatched crowd control you bring to the team gives a certain sense of safety, knowing that you have the power to neutralize even the densest pack of crushers and the thickest of hordes from a distance. This build is a must-bring when I'm dealing with rotten armor of any kind. With that, I wholeheartedly recommend trying this build out for yourself if you are tired with the same old Inferno Staff. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.